Okay, so I just finished recording the Godzilla design tier list that I made, which will probably have been released a couple weeks back on this channel. But since I'm in a tier mood, I might as well shed some tears and make a Godzilla film tier list. Now, this tier list that I found online, I will leave in the description. It's not just movies, it also includes the shows. And so I'm going to rank them based on the ranking guide list that I have made for all the movies and shows already. I'm not going to show the document in this video, but I have a Microsoft Word document where I give each Godzilla movie or show a ranking. This video was recorded on May 21st, 2024, so if there's anything not in this video, that's because it's come out after the fact. I have also added a tier specifically for the things that I haven't watched yet, so we'll get to those as we go through. Okay, so I'm recording this on Memorial Day 2024, so the rest of the video was recorded at a different time. I wanted to prove that this tier list is not complete bullshit, so I'm going to show you the shelf I have full of all of the Godzilla movies that I own presently. So, up here at the top, just because it can't really fit in with anything else, I have the Criterion Showa collection, as well as the Gamera collection, which I haven't watched yet, but I have unwrapped. And then I bought a bunch of magazines, and then I have all of these organized by release date. So, this top row is all the Showa stuff from Gojira all the way to the Godzilla the Series DVDs. And yes, I have the full series, but we got these first, so these are only some of the episodes, and these are the ones that are like the quote-unquote children's tier DVDs that parents just get for their kids just to appease them. And everything starting from here is Millennium up until the Reiwa era, and I also have the MonsterVerse stuff mixed in with this. I also have Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee for GameCube, and Godzilla for PS4, kinda just slotted into the appropriate spots. They're all organized by year, so I'd have Godzilla Save the Earth mixed in there as well, but the box for that and the disc is at my mom's house, which is an hour and a half away. But anyway, regardless of that, I also have a bunch of Ultraman steelbooks. I do have the original non-steelbook DVDs of the original Ultraman series, but those are, again, at my mom's house. And then this is all non-Godzilla monster stuff. Yes, I have the Gamera film collection, but I didn't realize that I had it with me. I thought I had lost it. So I ordered the 2 Blu-ray volumes that are kind of like made from that. And then I have Pacific Rim 1 and 2, and then a bunch of King Kong stuff. You know, I bought this, the 1970s King Kong, and I haven't watched it yet. And then on the bottom, I've just got, you know, miscellaneous Ultraman stuff, and then all my other movies and stuff. Some of them are my girlfriend's, because when we moved here, she had a few DVDs, but obviously she doesn't collect things like I do. Also, there's my PS4 games for the console that I do not have at present, and my Nintendo Switch games. And then my copy of the Dewey Rames Bible, and my volumes of the Little Nuns webcomic, which if you haven't followed that on Twitter, you should correct that immediately. And I got the ISOM volume, but I haven't actually read it yet, so. And then I know it's not the movies, but here are all of my different figurines and stuff. You know, my Amiibo and my X Pluses and my Nika and, you know, etc., etc. Pay no attention to the hard nipples on Musubi in the background. And then I absolutely regret the fact that this is the case, but there's a Funko Pop mixed in here with all the different SH Monster Arts and the Amiibos, etc., etc. That's my girlfriend's, not mine. We just needed a place to put it. I guess since I'm doing this, there's my Goku figure, and then my Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta and my Final Wars Godzilla, as well as my statues of Saint Joseph, and an Eastern Orthodox statue of Saint Raphael, who is currently missing an arm. But yeah, so I'm not bullshitting when I rank all these movies. I have many of them. The only ones I do not have are the anime trilogy movies, and that's because they're caught up in Netflix licensing, and so the only DVDs/Blu-rays that exist of them are Japan exclusives. So unless those movies have gotten released and I just don't know about it, that's why I don't have them. That's also why I don't have Godzilla Singular Point on Blu-ray or DVD. I would have it if Netflix didn't have the rights to all that stuff. As you'll see later in the video, my opinions of those films and that show are still rather, not great, but I would like to have them all just for completion's sake. in a few weeks, my copy of Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire on 4K Blu-ray is coming in the mail, so I will have that soon, and I'm also going to eventually get Godzilla Minus One when it releases on Blu-ray or 4K. But at the moment, that's all the stuff I have. That's just to prove I'm not a bullshitter, because this tier list that you're about to watch may or may not incense some people. Okay, so before we go into the movies, let's go over my tiers, because I always modified the tiers for these things before I start. Currently, I have S+ tier, which is objectively good. Here's where I'm going to catch a lot of hate. Most Godzilla fans will not recognize that most Godzilla movies are not good movies, because yes, there is an objective scale. I am a fan of Godzilla, and yet I recognize most of these movies are not good movies. It takes a certain level of quality to get to the realm where you can compare a Godzilla movie to other movies. So that's what this tier is for the few films that actually kind of broach that gap and actually can be compared to most other movies. Now, when I say most other movies, I don't mean MCU slop. A major problem with people's criticism or ranking of films comes from the fact that most people have a problem, and I see it all the time, where they conflate entertainment value with objective quality. The two things are indeed separate. Doesn't hurt to admit this, guys. You can be a fan of something and realize objectively that most of something isn't very good. I love giant monsters. I like monster movies. I like seeing giant monsters beat the shit out of each other, even in quote-unquote rubber suits. But I'm not going to pretend that that puts them on the same level as movies like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, or Beckett, or The Ten Commandments, or Spartacus, which are actually good movies. Most Godzilla movies do not reach that standard. So the ones that do deserve the credit and the praise that comes along with that. All of that is to say, this tier list will not be ranking them according to all movies that I've ever watched. If that were the case, most of them do not reach that level. But I do have a personal taste for Godzilla movies, so that's where this comes from. I'm not going to just shit on all the movies. I am a Godzilla fan. But I can admit when there are failings in the franchise. Okay, with all that being said, the original Japanese cut of Godzilla, referred to obviously as Gojira, is a classic and a great film. I wrote a paper in college about this and its themes involving nuclear devastation and the Japanese reaction to the bombings at the end of World War II. There's a reason this film spawned a franchise with this many films over this many years. I cannot praise this movie enough. There's only like one movie that I think could maybe compete with it in terms of objective quality. Raids Again is going to go into the bad Godzilla movies tier. Depending on how this list shakes out, I might move things around, but at the moment, I'm thinking of one specific film for the awful Godzilla movies category. So this one isn't that bad, so it goes into bad Godzilla movies. Okay, this is where I'm going to consult my guide so that I can see the last time I watched these movies where I ranked them. Okay, so King Kong vs. Godzilla. There's only one poster here, and it's the Japanese one, so I'm going to take the higher of the two scores, and we're going to go with the Japanese cut of King Kong vs. Godzilla. I'm going to plop this into good, because the ranking I gave it the last time I watched it was on the scale that I haven't defined that you guys don't see. It's an 8 out of 10 for the Japanese cut, and I think like a 2 or a 3 out of 10 for the English cut. So, since I'm going with the Japanese one, I'm going to go with the 8. But the list goes from 0 to 10, and there are 9s on my list that I have saved in the document that I'm reviewing in the background. It's a good movie, very entertaining, at least in the Japanese cut, but the additions that they made in the English cut that Universal released is not that good, so we'll just leave it there. Okay, never mind. I gave the English cut of King Kong vs. Godzilla a 6, and that's relevant for this. Mothra vs. Godzilla gets ahead of it in the A tier. And the reason for that is I gave them both the same score for the Japanese versions, but the English dub / American cut for these films got a slightly higher score, so I'm going to put it ahead. Okay, I'm going to put these next two in at the same time. Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, and Invasion of Astro-Monster are both in the great tier. The reason I put them both together is because as far as I'm concerned, they're basically just one long movie. It's basically just the first part and the second part of one long Ghidorah-focused film. A lot of people, from what I understand, rank Invasion of Astro-Monster lower, but as someone who didn't grow up with the Showa films, I don't really see much of a difference off of the bat. So I'm gonna put them together and they're both in great. Also, Astro-Monster has the funny Godzilla dance, so maybe it gets credit for that. Okay, so Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, also known as Ebirah Horror of the Deep, is a point below Mothra vs. Godzilla and King Kong vs. Godzilla, so I have to kind of automatically put it in the tier underneath. Because it's obviously nowhere near as bad as Godzilla Raids Again, which was a rushed sequel, but it was supposed to be a King Kong film originally, and you can kind of tell by watching it. I have a bit of a soft spot for Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. The VHS tape for that film is one of the few VHS tapes that I had that hasn't survived to the present day. But I like it, because I don't feel like divvying up this tier list into infinite tiers. Son of Godzilla goes underneath Sea Monster. I have it as a 5 on my list. It's just not as entertaining as Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, and it birthed the abomination known as Minya. And it gave us one of the worst Godzilla suit designs in the entire franchise, so I feel like I'm justified in putting it underneath the Sea Monster. Okay, this next one's not in the tier list. I had to add it to the tier list. Thank goodness they added that feature. I'm gonna put Destroy All Monsters slightly above Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. I have it rated higher on my guide sheet that I'm looking at. This movie gets way too much hype. I think a lot of older people think that it was like some amazing thing, when in reality the Destroy All Monsters name is kind of a misnomer, because the entire fight with King Ghidorah at the end is literally just Godzilla, Anguirus, and Gorosaurus versus King Ghidorah. Everyone else is irrelevant. The name is great, and I honestly hope that the Monsterverse makes a Destroy All Monsters movie in the future, but this one's overhyped. It doesn't deserve the praise it gets. All Monsters Attack, also known as Godzilla's Revenge, is the entire reason the awful Godzilla movies category even exists. It's an awful film. The dub is an atrocity upon this earth. I've never watched the Japanese cut, but I mean, it's probably just as bad. The only thing I can imagine would be any better is that Minya's voice is probably slightly better. Okay, next up, we have Godzilla vs. Hedorah. I feel like there's some personal bias going into this one. Don't ask me what it is in specific, but for some reason I watched this a lot as a child. I think it's mostly just that I like Hedorah as a kaiju. As you guys can see, the Showa era has kind of ballooned the mediocre Godzilla movies category here. It's not just the Showa movies, and I don't give credit to the later movies for not being Showa movies, but this is what I was talking about at the beginning of the video. Most of these films are not that great. Speaking of not that great, ignore me. I had to move Raids Again into a different category because things were starting to shift around. Godzilla vs. Gigan. That one's in the bad Godzilla movies category. It's above Son of Godzilla, but I don't think this movie had much to contribute to the franchise aside from destroying the Soshingeki suit and giving us Gigan, one of the best monsters in the franchise. I distinctly recall there being a lot of stock footage in this one, and I also just remember it's boring as sin. I like the idea that there's a cartoonist that draws kaiju and that's the main character in some form. I like the Nebula M Space Hunters, but it was just a boring slog to watch the last time I watched it, so I'm not going to rank it very highly. Okay, now this next one is a little bit tricky, so I'm probably going to take a second to explain my ranking for it. Godzilla vs. Megalon is a very, 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 very special case. It's so bad, and it's so goofy. It plays into the Showa tropes and cliches so strongly that it unironically loops back around to being great. It's one of the best films in the franchise, purely from an entertainment and comedy standpoint. The reason I rank it lower than Mothra vs. Godzilla is for precisely that reason. It's not a serious film. Put it ahead of King Kong vs. Godzilla just because I feel like both of them are kind of meant to be campy and really fun kaiju romps, but I find Megalon to be more entertaining, and Megalon's a great kaiju, so that's why it's ranked where it's ranked. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 1 in 1974 is an amazing movie. I love this movie. From stuff like fake Godzilla ripping open Anguirus' jaw and bullying him, to the Godzilla vs. fake Godzilla reveal that turns into the Mechagodzilla fight the first time, to the really campy nature of the girl singing to awaken King Caesar. I did really enjoy the human story in this one, for some reason. I really like the simian aliens. Maybe I'll put up the redesign that Matt Frank did of them on the screen right about now. I've always loved these guys, I just find them interesting. Which is why it's kind of sad that I have to rank Terror of Mechagodzilla in the tier under it, and even under Godzilla vs. Hedorah. I rewatched this recently. I believe the last time I rewatched it was right before Godzilla King of the Monsters 2019 came out. It was a bit of a slog, it wasn't very entertaining. It has some of the best moments in the franchise, like a moment where Godzilla emerges from that building early on in the movie. It also introduces the only perfect organism to exist after Christ, which was Titanosaurus, so it gets a lot of credit for a lot of the things it does. Unfortunately, it's boring, and you would think that that wouldn't be the case considering it's the only Godzilla film that has exposed tits on the screen, but they were like a plastic model mannequin. It wasn't actual female breasts, so we gotta dock it some points for that too. I just find Hedorah to be more interesting. It also doesn't have any like Showa iconic funny moments, you know. Hedorah has Godzilla flying at least. Terror Mechagodzilla, as far as I can recall, doesn't really have anything fun in it. I mean, Mechagodzilla 2 without the head is kind of funny looking, but that's really it. Okay, now we're gonna broach the Heisei series, I believe. This is gonna cause some controversy, I feel. Yes, I put Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster over the Return of Godzilla / Godzilla 1984. I'm sorry, I'm just not really a big fan of Godzilla 1984. That movie is just kind of boring to me. I mean, it introduced Super X and it gave us the blueprint for the best Godzilla design in the franchise, but I need to watch the Raymond Burr version of this film, but I don't really know if there's any legitimate way to watch it or how I could pirate it online and stream it. Okay, so I'm gonna upset some Showa heads, but I'm also going to explain one of the big reasons for the great Godzilla movies category. Godzilla vs. Biollante is one of the best films in the franchise. It's honestly a crime that you had to pirate it as a child and that it took so long for it to get legitimately released here in the United States. The fact that it took as long as it did is a shame because it's a good movie. I really enjoy it. And it's one of the films, I feel like it's almost a meme at this point, to recommend to a new Godzilla fan. It's a good thing it wasn't recommended when I was young because it was hard to find, but it might be easier now. I know most of the Godzilla movies are hard to find even today. But Godzilla vs. Biollante is one of the best films in the franchise, and it introduced one of the best monsters in the franchise. So I feel like I'm justified in putting it where I do. I'm more of a Heisei guy, so maybe I'm just biased against it that I put it above Ghidorah the three-headed monster, but make your own tier list if you don't like my rankings. Okay, so Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah 1991 is going somewhere in here. I'm gonna plead personal bias on this one. Yes, I know I talked about how much I love Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, and I understand that Mothra vs. Godzilla is considered one of the best films in the franchise by true diehard fans. I love Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah though. Yes, the time travel plot is broken as hell, but it did give us M11 running. It gave us what I personally think is the best version of King Ghidorah in terms of design. Obviously, backstory, it kind of falls apart, but I really also like the Ghidorah roars. The moment where Godzilla has the kind of pseudo-staring contest with the veteran of World War II from the Japanese side is also great.
It's so sad Steve Jobs died of Who the hell is Steve Jobs?
But this is one of my favorites. I think Mechagodzilla is really cool. It was a little bit fumbled, but I just really like this film. Unfortunately, the VHS tape has not survived. I don't know where it even is, but I really like this film. Godzilla vs. Mothra, or Godzilla and Mothra, The Battle for Earth. It's going to be a tier below Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah because of my ranking sheet. I'm going to put it under Godzilla vs. Hedorah, but above Terror of Mechagodzilla, just because I feel like I enjoy it less than Godzilla vs. Hedorah, but I enjoy it more than Terror of Mechagodzilla. It also has Batra, so it gets kind of credit from the fact that it includes Batra, who, while his roar is a lazy redux of Rodan, technically Rodan doesn't show up in the Heisei series until the next movie, so I guess technically he's the first person with that roar in this continuity at that time. So I like a lot of the stuff it does with Mothra, particularly the design and kind of when the Mothra larva burrows through Tokyo and then turns into the adult form. It also has the fight where we have the Ferris wheel, so it gets little bits of points here and there. That's why it's ranked where it's ranked. Okay, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla II is going to be in the same tier as Godzilla and Mothra, The Battle for Earth, but I think the question is, where do I put it in relation to that? I feel like, even though I love Batra to death, I have a sort of soft spot in my heart for the Heisei Mechagodzilla design. Super Mechagodzilla isn't really that great, but the movie also includes Baby Godzilla and Fire Rodan, and I really like the Fire Rodan design. And Baby Godzilla, though awful, has a really good song in there called From Mickey to Baby. And the ending of the film where Godzilla walks out to the ocean with Baby alongside is kind of touching, and I really like it. And Baby Godzilla does lead to the single best version of the Godzilla Spawn character, so I gotta give it credit. I still think that Hedorah is probably going to be above it just because I enjoy Hedorah more. I feel like Hedorah is kind of like the top of the mediocre Godzilla films category. But Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 is still pretty fun. I just don't know if I'd rank it any higher than I have it. Okay, Space Godzilla is going to go into the bad Godzilla movies category. Where do I put it though? I think Space Godzilla is going to be the king of the bad Godzilla movies category. Don't hold me to that, but that's just my hunch, based on what I remember about my rankings of these films. Space Godzilla is great. Little Godzilla is the best version of the little Godzilla spawn that we've gotten so far, but it is kind of boring. I'm not really a huge fan of the human subplot in this one. I do like that Miki Sagusa causes a metal table to kind of lift while she's on it. It really shows her power. I actually like Gojira, but I just remember this movie being incredibly boring and such a snooze fest when I last went through the franchise, so can't give it too much credit. It's better than Godzilla vs. Gigan. At least there's no stock footage that I know of. It's also not Son of Godzilla, so yeah, I think Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla is going at the top of this tier. Okay, this is probably going to be a controversial judgment call. Most people think that Godzilla vs. Destoroyah is an amazing movie, but I'm just gonna come clean with it. I think it's good, but I think the Godzilla meltdown carries this film, and I say that as someone who bawls like a baby every single time I watch Godzilla meltdown. The Requiem music that goes alongside Godzilla's meltdown kills me because I grew up watching the Godzilla movies. It is an incredibly heartbreaking moment. Anyone who's a Godzilla fan, I know, is going to rank Godzilla vs. Destoroyah high as a result of that. The part where Godzilla bonds with Godzilla Jr., who is dying because of Destoroyah biting him, is heartbreaking, and it's even worse for me now because I've lost my own father. I'm getting kind of sort of choked up, not really, about talking about it. This movie has emotional weight. However, as I said at the beginning of this video, I will not rank these films based on the fact that I just like them as Godzilla movies. They need to be good films. And Godzilla vs. Destoroyah has faults, even amongst its brethren other Godzilla films. So I can't rank it any higher than this. Godzilla does not kill Destoroyah, the JSDF do. The human subplot is good, but it's not great. I love the fact that it harkens back to the plot of the original Gojira, but it's just not that good. Yes, like I said, there are some great things. Super X3 is amazing, and the sequence where it goes against Godzilla in the bay is awesome. The music is great. I have it saved on my phone, but I cannot in good faith rank it any higher than it is currently. Good film, not great. Okay, this film is the entire reason this category exists. Godzilla 1998 is a good movie. It's a good kaiju flick, but I do not find it to be a good Godzilla movie. It does have its points. It did spawn Godzilla the series, which is an amazing Godzilla cartoon. It does have a really great roar, but Matthew Broderick is not a good Nick Tatopoulos. The cartoon has a better one. Pretty much all the other human characters suck. Godzilla should not die to missile fire. That's probably this film's greatest sin. Godzilla should not be running and hiding from the military for most of the movie. I don't mind that he burrows underground. I just don't like that he's such a little bitch. The military should not be able to bully him around like they do. I love some of the sequences, but it's not a good Godzilla movie. I would say it's an entertaining monster movie, and if there were other monster movies that I were ranking with this, I'd probably put it pretty close to the top of this tier amongst those peers, but I can't do any higher than this. Okay, this is going to be a controversial one. I'm not ranking this one based on the Japanese version because I don't have it ranked in the document that I'm using for reference, but I do have a soft spot, and I'm talking a really soft spot for Godzilla 2000. I'm gonna put it smack between Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster and Invasion of Astro-Monster because Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster has more significance to the franchise in terms of history and development of the franchise, lore and otherwise. But like I said, I've also heard people say that Invasion of Astro-Monster isn't really that great, which I can see. I'm also gonna kind of average in the Japanese version of Godzilla 2000, which I haven't seen, but from what I understand, it's rather boring. So that's why it's going to go under Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, but above Invasion of Astro-Monster. Okay, so this one I'm going entirely based off of the numbers, and I'm comparing them to each other. I would say that I probably enjoy Godzilla vs. Gigan more, but Godzilla vs. Megaguirus is not nearly as bad as Son of Godzilla. The Dimension Tide is probably most of this, and it did kinda serve as a blueprint for Godzilla against Mechagodzilla and Tokyo SOS after that. Some of the music was inspirational to that, so I'll give it some credit, but it's not that great. I really don't want to go back and watch it the next time I have to marathon all these movies. Okay, this one should have been obvious. GMK, also known as Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack, is one of the best films in the franchise, and I think it's the best film in the franchise that includes Godzilla as well as other monsters. So it's worth revering for that, if nothing else, but it doesn't reach the heights of the original Gojira. It's really good, and I like it, but it's not the best of the best. It is better than most of the films in the franchise, but I'm going to rank it underneath Gojira. That's the short version. Okay, another controversial one. A lot of these Mechagodzilla films seem to wind up in the mediocre category. I'm going to plop Godzilla against Mechagodzilla underneath Godzilla and Mothra, The Battle for Earth, but above Terror of Mechagodzilla because it's boring, and I really don't like the fact that Godzilla just kind of stands there and gets punched for most of the movie, but it does have pretty decent effects, and it has the best designed Mechagodzilla iteration, so it gets some credit, but I really just don't like the human story. Yeah, maybe there's one or two good moments in it, but this movie really is just the setup for the next film, which I believe is actually really good, and my opinion has rather improved about it over the years. Tokyo SOS is one of the best films in the franchise. Where would I put it, though? I feel like I'm going to put it underneath Biollante, but above Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, just because it's very reverent to the history of the franchise, but its effects are very much improved over, obviously, a Showa film that was much older. But it also doesn't reach the human heights of Godzilla vs. Biollante. I actually like much of the human story of Godzilla Tokyo SOS, but it doesn't reach those peaks. So I can't rank it any higher than I do, but it's a very good film, and Like I said, it's a massive improvement over Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. Okay, now this is a weird one, and a lot of people are gonna hate me depending on where I rank this, especially new fans. If we're going purely based on the 30 minutes in which monsters are present, as well as the time when Captain Gordon is on screen, it probably goes right underneath Godzilla vs. Destoroyah because it is a fun time. And Captain Gordon, are you the best human character in the entire franchise?
Yes.
That being said, however, movies are not just defined by how much time Godzilla spends on screen. As a result, I'm going to put it kind of with its counterpart from the Showa era. I'm going to put it right above Destroy All Monsters. Is it fun at times? Absolutely, but the parts of it that are not about Godzilla and are more so about ripping off the Matrix and just mutant-human fights and humans fighting monsters, that whole sequence with the mutants versus Hedorah comes to mind. I just can't rank it that high. It's mediocre. It's not terrible. There's parts of it that I'd watch a million times, but there's also parts that I wish I'd never watched, so I can't rank it in totality very high. Okay, so this next one is going to really cause controversy. People are really not going to like to hear my thoughts on this, but I have ragged on Godzilla 2014 numerous times across the videos in this channel, so let's see where it finally falls in my rankings. I gave it the same rank in the reference document as I gave to Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. So it would fall somewhere around here, right? I saw this movie when I was young. Like, I saw it in theaters for the first time, and up until then, I hadn't seen any Godzilla movies in theaters. So I feel like I need to give it credit for that. However, it's being cock-blocked from going any higher by the existence of Batra. Really, you could probably just interchange this with Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. I really don't have any strong thoughts on which one should be above the other. Just for the personal significance, I'll put it above Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, but I'm not really a fan of the design. It's way too dark. The Blu-ray's impossible to watch. The movie gets wanked off way too hard by people who thought this was the second coming. I like Gareth Edwards, but I really feel like the executives that were behind this project really stole his vision away from him, and the movie that we ended up being kind of half-baked because it felt like he wanted to do a serious Godzilla disaster film, which I really would have liked to have seen, but the executives and producers thought that a monster mash would have been more financially viable, and it's clear based on where the MonsterVerse went after this that that was the vision that they had, which is fine, but it ended up being half-baked, and I really just not a fan of Godzilla 2014. Also, they killed Heisenberg, Walter White, Bryan Cranston at the end of the first act, which was something that the epic rap battle of history made fun of and was completely justified in so doing.
This awful gorilla won't be bringing no silver bash. Just like Bryan Cranston, you can dance as the first act.
Anyway, I've spent way too much time talking about that. I just don't really buy the hype behind this film or Godzilla's design. I also really don't like the Mutos. They're not really good monsters. I don't care what anyone says. Yes, it's just my opinion, man, but I really don't get it. You can like it, but I really don't. Okay, now watch as people use this as criticism of my MonsterVerse criticism. Up until another film got released, this was the best movie that had been released since the original Gojira. GMK is good, but it does kind of lose something because of the fact that there are other monsters fighting Godzilla. I feel like the solo Godzilla films are probably the strongest, mostly because they mostly focus on the human story and the themes that surround that story without really having to worry about the monsters. I feel like at some point they end up having to juggle too many plots. That's not a knock necessarily against GMK because it is still in the S+ tier, but I do think Shin Godzilla kind of edges it out. And just before we got this film, I was a little bit hesitant about giving Godzilla multiple forms, but it actually pulled it off rather well, which other pieces of the franchise have not done. So, okay, now for the moment you've all been waiting for. I believe that Godzilla Planet of the Monsters is one of the worst, if not the worst, Godzilla movie ever made. It is so boring. The characters are so cardboard. Godzilla moves at like 1 frame every 10 seconds. The Servum are not interesting, unique kaiju. The anime trilogy got better as it went, and you'll see that in a second. But the fact that I have to fight for the worst Godzilla movie with Godzilla's Revenge, of all things, Ghidorah alone makes that one the victor here. Minya's goofy doofy voice should sink it to the bottom. Raids Again being cheap and rushed should rush it to the bottom. But somehow Toho said, hold my beer, and made Godzilla Planet of the Monsters. Its prequel, which is not even available to read in the West in English, is infinitely better than the plot that it has. This is such a golden opportunity for a setup for a Godzilla movie series. Literally, mankind leaves because the monsters destroy the entire planet. You literally are being handed a good story on a silver platter and you ruin it. Just absolutely unbelievable. Also, let me rag on the Exif and the Biollante for a second here. They're literally just humans. These are not alien species. They are not the simians. They could have had the simians and not the Biollante, but no, we can't reuse any of the aliens. We gotta make something new and unique for these anime films. Garbage. Absolute garbage. Okay, so now we've got City on the Edge of Battle. City on the Edge of Battle jumps up a few places. I basically score it based on where Planet of the Monsters was. And although all the things that I said are still true, at least they kind of differentiated the Biollante and made them technology worshippers. And this film also is the one that had Mechagodzilla City, so at least the fight at the end, even though it was still basically Godzilla doesn't move at all, at least he falls into a pit, which is part of the defense system for Mechagodzilla City. It's really not that good, but its innovative ideas are kind of enough to kind of push it past Raids Again, which, while I'm on the subject, Megaguirus does not unfortunately balloon Raids Again very much. He could have been absent from that film and it would have still been the same. But yeah, City on the Edge of Battle, still pretty awful. Oh, one last thing I forgot to mention is that City on the Edge of Battle is the only Godzilla movie that currently has an implied sex scene. Because it's implied that Haruo had sex with one of the twins from the ending of Planet of Monsters. So, on to more serious matters, Planet Eater is just as bad. The Exif are kind of differentiated. It kind of improves things, sort of. Godzilla the Planet Eater suffers from all the same problems as the rest of the anime films. Godzilla barely moves, so even though the concept of King Ghidorah being an eldritch god from another dimension is great, the fight is awful. I don't even remember how it ends. I guess one positive is that it sort of develops the Exif slightly to where they're like King Ghidorah worshippers. Again, they look just like humans, so you could just have humans that worship Ghidorah. Really, the only reason that this movie is even as quote-unquote high in the tier that it's in is that it's the third in the trilogy, so it's developed the story enough by the point that it happens that it kind of excuses some of it. It's pretty bad, though. Okay, I'm gonna diverge from my reference sheet here a little bit. Godzilla King of the Monsters 2019 was fine. I think I gave it a little bit too much credit when I initially ranked it because I love all the Godzilla and kaiju scenes in this film. It's kind of like Godzilla Final Wars in that respect, in that if you completely cut out the human story, the film is kind of good. But there's two major problems and they're interconnected. It's kind of like a rectangles and squares kind of deal. The studio should never have forced there to be a family subplot in this movie, and Michael Dougherty was kneecapped inherently by having to include it. It was bad and it shouldn't have been in there. Included in that, I don't really like Millie Bobby Brown. I really don't. And so the fact that the film kind of tries to focus on her and make her the focal point, I'm glad they got rid of her by the time Godzilla X Kong The New Empire came out. It wasn't that good. She's not that good. The monster scenes on their own make it better than 2014, but unfortunately, it's just not that great. Okay, it's not a Godzilla movie, but I feel like since I had to rank the next one, I might as well rank this one among these movies. It's not a Godzilla movie, but it is MonsterVerse, so I rank it by the same scale. So everything I've said about the scale so far still applies to this one. It pains me to say, but Kong Skull Island is better than anything that has been Godzilla specific in the MonsterVerse. I'm only ranking it among these movies because as a part of the MonsterVerse, it's relevant to the next film. But I really feel like the fact that it's Kong and they're basing it on the Kong public domain character instead of King Kong meant that they were able to make a far better film than Godzilla 2014 before it. And as a Godzilla fan, that hurts. But I think that studio heads must love to just interfere with Godzilla film development, at least in Western studios, which are kind of massive problems on their own. So yeah, I rank it where I rank it. It's above Megalon, but that's only because Kong Skull Island is an objectively fun and good film, and it's in the running. It's just, it's flawed, so I can't put it any higher than that, but that's why it wound up where it wound up. Okay, now Godzilla vs. Kong, not to be confused with 1962's King Kong vs. Godzilla. So right off the bat, it's better than King of the Monsters. There are other monsters in it, and there are monster fights in it. So it's already better than that. Is it better than Skull Island? I'm gonna say it's better than Megalon, but I'm gonna say it's worse than Skull Island, and that's only because I feel like the versus Mechagodzilla thing at the end and the whole King Ghidorah's skull powering Mechagodzilla part is kind of undercooked, and I feel like it could have been done better. So I feel like Skull Island kind of gets elevated above it just because Skull Island does what it sets out to do well, but Godzilla vs. Kong kind of flops at the things that it does try. So I have not watched Monarch Legacy of Monsters. I haven't heard a lot of good things about it. Many of the Godzilla fans I've heard things from think that it's good, but I don't want to get political, but due to how Western studios operate nowadays ideologically, I think there's stuff in it that I probably wouldn't enjoy, not because it's there, but just because it's there and not integrated well. But I don't have any opinions on it. I heard apparently Godzilla doesn't show up in it much. I don't have Apple TV. I'm probably going to pirate it at some point. Maybe when I go through my next rewatch of the whole franchise, maybe that's what I'll do. But I'm just going to put it at the bottom of the list. I haven't watched it yet, so. Okay, all of my complaints about Godzilla Singular Point are coming to fruition. Singular Point is garbage. It's only moderately better than Planet of the Monsters, and that mostly comes from the fact that it's a series, not a single movie. It also has traditional animation for the human characters, which I would like to have been integrated also for the kaiju in the series, but it's better than nothing, and I'll take what I can get, because after the anime trilogy, I was like, please just don't screw it up again, which, you know, they did, but that's not the point I'm trying to make here. The plot, I don't even remember most of the plot. I read, like, a Reddit post that came up with, like, a better version of what the story should have been and what Godzilla should have symbolized. The fact that Godzilla had forms was unnecessary. It definitely didn't reach the heights of Shin Godzilla, that's for damn sure. I liked May and her little program, you know, Pelops 2. I'm glad that they brought back some of the monsters they did, like, you know, Jet Jaguar. Salunga not being Ghidorah is both a blessing and a curse, because that series was so bad that I'm almost glad they didn't name it Ghidorah, because Ghidorah, even in the film that it's in, is better than that. I don't even remember the main character aside from May. Jet Jaguar, his design isn't really that great. I mean, I'm glad he's back, but Kamanga was done terribly. The Aqualitis Godzilla is basically just Titanosaurus, but shittier, and it was basically just rage bait in the advertising. The Mechagodzilla design was pretty good. You know, it was based on the show of Mechagodzilla, but oh, wait a minute. That was only in the cliffhanger at the end of the series, so by the end of it, you're like, oh, please, for the love of all that is good and holy, just end already. And by the end, you're like, oh, thank goodness it's over, and I don't want a second season. I don't want to see that Mechagodzilla. I guess the design was good, that's about it. Also, it gave Anguirus time travel powers, which I guess is great. Really bold move. I'd really love to have seen all the female characters be busting out of their tops and basically, you know, triple D and beyond, but I'll settle for time traveling Anguirus. That's, you know, that's great. Also, I want a Pelops 2 plush. If that exists, I want someone to send me a link. Not much more to say than that, although I did just say a lot, so. In sheer contrast to Godzilla Singular Point, I don't know how we got a swing in quality this big back to back. Singular Point was the last main Godzilla thing if we're ignoring Legacy of Monsters, which I haven't watched. I was so worried that Minus One was going to be bad because Singular Point was so bad, and I know that they're different mediums, you know, live action versus anime, but I was just so worried this was going to be bad, and I can safely say that it is certainly not. Godzilla Minus One might actually be the best movie in the franchise. If my reverence for the original Gojira got the better of me, I might put it underneath it. And I'm really wary of recency bias when I do stuff like this, but I saw Godzilla Minus One in theaters twice, and it is that good. Koichi is amazing. Probably the best human character in the franchise. So, is party to the best romantic subplot in the entire franchise, and I mean, the bar is not very high for that. Akiko is a freaking kid, and she is so good. That child actress, I want to give huge shout outs to her because she did such a good job. When she cried, I honestly was heartbroken. That was one of the best moments in any Godzilla movie, and it doesn't even involve the monsters.
Oh, no. No.
This is what I was talking about when I was talking about how most of the Godzilla movies are not objectively good films. Godzilla Minus One is an objectively good film, maybe even a great one. I know there's some moments of overacting, and maybe the surprise reveal at the end in the human story is a little bit out of left field. I won't spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it. But if you haven't watched Godzilla Minus One, you absolutely need to. It's one of the best films in the franchise, and it absolutely deserves all the praise that it's gotten. And it absolutely deserves to be compared to the Monsterverse, and absolutely deserves to be absolutely shit-stomping it, as my tier list is showing. Speaking of swings in quality, Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire came out recently, and I did see it in theaters with my younger brother, immediately obviously following Godzilla Minus One a few months prior to that. Where am I going to drop this guy? So in the reference sheet as it stands, it is currently at the same score as 2014. So I guess the question is, where do I drop it in relation to that? And I will say, it might actually deserve to be far lower than it is now. I'm gonna put it above Destroy All Monsters and underneath Godzilla Final Wars. It kinda has that Megalon thing going for it, where it's so bad that it's kind of fun. But I do find Final Wars to be more entertaining, mostly off of the back of Don Fry as Captain Gordon. There aren't really any human characters in X Kong: The New Empire that really reach that peak. Bernie is the closest, and he's really not even that great. I think he was better in Godzilla vs. Kong. But it's also not nearly as boring as Destroy All Monsters, so it gets points for being more entertaining. I really like the Infinity Gauntlet that Kong gets. I really like the fact that all the monsters move as quickly as they do. Shimo is great, Scar King is great, but like, you know, the zero gravity fight and the fact that Godzilla is pretty much irrelevant for most of the movie, I can't really rank it much higher than I have it. Okay, so that is my total ranking of all the Godzilla films. And obviously, Legacy of Monsters is not ranked because I haven't watched it. But tell me what you guys think. This is my list. I know I talked about a lot of things that people don't really like, such as objective quality and Minus One versus the Monsterverse, but I personally think this is how the tiers shake out. And you're free to make your own tier list, you know, and you're free to have your own opinions. I'm not like word of God on this franchise. I'm just glad that there's so many Godzilla films that I can even make a tier list this long about it. Those are just my thoughts. But, I mean, I've been watching these movies since before I could even remember that I watched them. Like, I'm serious. Like, I was drawing Godzilla in my notebook in, like, kindergarten and first grade. Like, that's how much I love Godzilla. I've watched it for that long. But it is nice to finally live in the greatest time to be a Godzilla fan. Yes, I know I've ragged on the Monsterverse, but I'm glad that it's re-injected the franchise with some adrenaline. There's actual stuff to watch now that's new. As you guys saw, I ranked a lot of the anime stuff even worse than the Monsterverse stuff, so it's not like I have totally black and white, Japan good, America bad mindset. I hopefully explained most of my placements of those movies as I did them. Anyways, you guys drop a like if you enjoyed the video. Tell me your own rankings in the comments. Tell me how much you think I'm an idiot, how bad I rank things, how much of a chud you think I am, etc, etc, etc. Just let me know and, you know, engage with the content. That's the most important thing. I just am happy that people love Godzilla as much as I do, and that I live in the age of the internet where I can connect with people who also love Godzilla. Drop a like if you enjoyed, drop a like if you did not enjoy, leave a comment, and I will see you guys in the next video whenever I post it.